our journey starts here in Barabat, just to the north of the ancient desert fortress of Jaisalmer. Now this really famous medieval desert city is in Rajasthan in India. Some years ago a really important find was made here. In a store was found over 2 tons of gunpowder. Well, of course the local police chief took fright, called in the army, who came along and took it away and destroyed it. Well, the story would have ended there, but fortunately news of this find got onto the internet and came to the notice of the Medieval Centre in Denmark. Well, it turned out that actually not all of this had been destroyed, and they managed to get hold of a small sample, take it back to Denmark for analysis. Well, it turned out not to be gunpowder at all, but sulphur, one of the ingredients of gunpowder. Now, to understand this, we have to go back and have a look at the story of gunpowder. There couldn't really be a better time to tell you a little bit about the story and history of gunpowder than today, because it's the Hindu festival Diwali, which is celebrated all over India by the setting off of fireworks, which I think you can hear going off all around me. Now, no one really knows where and when gunpowder was invented. We think it was invented about 1,000 years ago in China, when it was used to make incendiaries and fireworks and primitive weapons. Gunpowder is made of 3 vital ingredients: sulphur, charcoal and saltpeter. Now the charcoal you could get anywhere, of course. We've used it for centuries. Everybody uses it for cooking. Sulphur actually comes from volcanic areas like Iceland or Sicily or in Java. But it's the saltpeter that's really hard to get. It occurs naturally in the earth, but only in certain places. And at the moment we think that one of the reasons why it started off in China was because that's where you could find natural deposits of saltpeter. Now, after its first invention, of course, it spread out from China. First of all, we think it reached India, and then, of course, across the Asian continent to Europe through the East Mediterranean. By 1600, this trade was becoming very organised, and companies were set up in Western Europe to trade with the East. The 2 big famous ones are the Dutch East India Company and the English East India Company, but there were many other smaller ones, including the Danes. What they found in India, though, especially in the northwest, was large deposits of saltpeter which they could export back to Western Europe. And it was this saltpeter which enabled them to produce vastly greater quantities of gunpowder, which of course enabled them to fight much bigger, longer and more ferocious wars. So although the story of gunpowder can be seen as one just about war, it is really one about trade, international relations, high finance and globalization. So this small find of sulphur from this beautiful fortress behind me really does show us a window into medieval gunpowder, and that leads us on to early modern gunpowder and really the whole rise of the world today. Over the next couple of days we hope to go inside and explore just where this sulphur was found, find out more about it and try to find out more of the fascinating story of gunpowder. In India, everything is possible. This is what the museum director said to the Danish girl who came here to collect the sample of gunpowder 2 years ago. We're sitting outside the gate at Jaisalmer now, in a cafe. We spent the morning in the museum talking to the people there and also talking to the locals to try to find out where the gunpowder was actually found. And in India, everything is possible because we found out that it was found in the tower behind me there. Unfortunately, since it was discovered and taken away, the tower's all been restored, so it's very difficult to see. But we've also had a lot of talk about what date that is, and it's very obvious that it's medieval, which is really great for us because that is exactly what we wanted.
From now to 5 or 6 years ago, there's a backside of this place. There's a part of the government place which is works with the government. There's a labor person who want to just put out something from the earth, and he used his labor material to put out. There's lots of gunpowder mines which was using by the ruler people when there's any enemy attack from the outside to Jaisalmer fort, then they put out and they put on the cannons which are on the all four sides of the fort. Yeah. They put on that and fire on that. But there's a long time ago there was lots of gunpowder. Yeah. That don't know by that labor person. He just put there's a 5-10 times and there's a power happen and blast it. On that situation, 3 people died.
3 people died.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's it.
And then the military came and removed it.
Yeah, that's not removed. Still it is there. Yeah. There's a government just comes, they put out the places. Sorry. Just covered that with the cement.
Yeah.
And when people we are not sure if people forget this after 10 years, 20 years, this situation or this problems can be happen again.
Probably, yeah.
Well, we've just spoken to Pankaj here at the German bakery, and he's come up, as you've heard, with quite a different story about how the gunpowder actually exploded and killed people. Well, as we've already said, in India, everything is possible. Our journey here to the northwest province of India, to Rajasthan, and the wonderful desert fortress of Jaisalmer ends here in the desert, just to the north of the city, in the bakingly hot dunes. Our journey to Jaisalmer, trying to find the origins of the medieval gunpowder, proved to be quite successful, although I'm sure we'll never really get to the complete truth of how and where it was found. From here, we journey east, towards Delhi and then on to West Bengal and Patna, looking for saltpeter, looking for the wonderful, huge deposits of saltpeter that were exported to the West from the 16th, 17th and 18th centuries and helped to fuel the rise of Europe and the Western countries and really their globalization. India is a huge country, a subcontinent, and it's taken us nearly 2 days to drive from Jaisalmer in the west right across here to Delhi, which we're just coming into now. We've seen every conceivable type of transport, from the latest modern cars, trucks, right down to bullock carts and camel carts, endless rickshaws, bicycles and motorbikes. We've come on to Agra, to the south of Delhi, and we spent the morning looking for the fireworks factories, which we hope will lead us to where they make the saltpeter. We haven't had a very successful morning, and the reason for that is behind me now. There's a law in India that you're not allowed to build a factory that makes pollution within 50 kilometres of the Taj Mahal. And of course these factories are all within that site, so they're really working illegally. They're extremely suspicious of us and really didn't want us there. However, we hope, we've gained the confidence of one of the factories, and we're going back there in a couple of days when we hope we'll be able to take some photographs and get some film. We're keeping our fingers crossed. Let's hope we can. Well, we've come back to one of the villages we visited a couple of days ago to try to get more information. Fortunately, we haven't been very successful. They're still very suspicious of us. But what we have managed to find out is actually they don't make the gunpowder here anymore. So this trail, unfortunately, has run cold. However, we now have got another contact with someone who's, we're told, does make saltpeter in a place just to the north of here, about 40 kilometres away. And we're going to go there now. Well, we've come to Galathea now, to where our contact said this is the first factory where they make saltpeter. We're waiting for the owner now, and we've had a little look around. Doesn't look very promising at the moment. A lot of chemicals around, a lot of sort of piles of stuff and labels, but it all looks like it maybe they're making soda here or something else. Very unusual, and we're not quite sure what to find here, but we can't see at the moment any potassium nitrate, no saltpeter. But let's see.
ये कच्चा वाला?
Yes. -10 down here. Yeah. Well, that was a bit of a surprise. They do make saltpeter here, but unfortunately not in the old method. They're buying modern chemicals. They're using nitric acid and potassium chloride. They mix these together and make them hot. They use an antique recirculating boiler. It doesn't look as if it'd ever work, but they heat it to 60 degrees centigrade, mix it together, and the reactions then form potassium nitrate. We've now visited the factories that make saltpeter here in Galathea, but of course they're all starting with modern chemicals, although a lot of the processes are quite old. We've had a long talk with them, and what we've managed to do is persuade them to actually reconstruct for us the old process, which they're going to do here in this place, again in Galathea. The process here, what we're really interested in, is the extraction of the saltpeter from the earth, and we're going to see them collect the earth, extract the saltpeter from it using water, and then concentrate that by precipitation, and then take that raw, rather impure saltpeter and then purify that and clean it up so we can get saltpeter that can be used in gunpowder. Here we can actually see how they extract the saltpeter from the soil. This square rectangular structure has a false bottom. There's rows of bricks over which they've laid a layer of wooden rods. Over the rods they put sacking. This is rather deteriorated because it's an old one. And then on top of the sacking they lay the soil they're going to extract. Once it's been built up as quite a thickness, maybe about 20-25 centimetres, they pour water over this. The water soaks through the soil, dissolving the saltpeter, and runs out through a hole in the front here and out in here into an earthenware or ceramic pot, and is then taken from there, and then it's further refined after that process.
In comparison to the foreign country.
Well, here we can see they've cleared out the base of the extraction unit. You can see the layers of bricks. And now what he's doing is he's prepared the wood, lengths of wood to go across. So they're going to make a bed of wooden sticks over which they'll later put gunny sacks. The soil of the area around Galathea is just full of potassium nitrate, of saltpeter. It's a very unusual area. What seems to happen is during the rainy season, from July to September, the soil gets soaking full of water. At the end of the rainy season, the end of September, the soil starts to dry out. What happens is that water evaporates from the surface, and by a process of leaching, it brings up minerals from within the soil, including the potassium nitrate, the water evaporates from the surface, leaving a layer of potassium nitrate of the saltpeter behind. By about March, this process has finished. The soil is very dry and there's a layer of saltpeter on the surface. People then go out into the fields and just scrape this top layer of soil with the saltpeter in it and collect it. It's as simple as that. We've now brought the saltpeter in from the field and it's being laid over the gunny sacks in the extraction unit, and it'll be filled up to a level of about 20–25 centimetres. The extraction unit has to be very carefully filled and the soil very well compacted down. If you don't do this, when you pour the water over it, the water runs through too quickly and doesn't extract enough saltpeter.
Yeah, cool.
Well, we've completed the extraction unit now with the earth, and now he's pouring water onto it. He pours it over a gunny sack because they don't want the water to run over it very quickly. They want a smooth, even flow of water so it doesn't make channels. So what we want to do is make the water soak through the soil as slowly as possible, extracting all the saltpeter, all the potassium nitrate as it soaks through and comes out in the front here and being collected in the basin they've put in the front.
So the same person will lift.
Now we've extracted the saltpeter from the soil in the extraction unit we've already seen. We've taken that liquor now and we've put that in this evaporating pan, quite a small one. They light a fire under this and then they boil it. They boil the liquid down till it gets quite thick. Once it gets to a sort of fairly thick consistency, and I think they judge this by eye rather than any sort of measurement, they then take that liquid, put it in an earthenware pot, and that is left overnight. Overnight this cools, the saltpeter crystallises out. They pour the liquid back in because it will also contain some dissolved nitrate. You never waste anything in this process. And the solid saltpeter, which is actually quite impure, perhaps only 50% of that is saltpeter, is then the raw saltpeter for the refining process and goes into the evaporating tank in the next process. Here we see the saltpeter has precipitated out of solution. He's returning the liquid back to the evaporating tank, because you never waste anything in this process. There'll be some saltpeter dissolved in that. And here you can see the joria, the impure saltpeter, in the bottom of the pan. He's carefully removing the liquid now so he doesn't lose any of the joria in the pan. And there we have it. There's our raw saltpeter, about 50% pure and ready to be refined. Well, here we are on top of the structure, and here we can see the enormous iron evaporating pan. It's almost 4 meters across. They've already partially filled it with the liquor, with the saltpeter liquor from the soil extraction, and now they're adding more. This is a very crucial part of the process. What actually happens is that the saltpeter and the salts dissolve in the liquid, in the water, and slowly their concentration is increased. Now, the important part is the solubility of potassium nitrate and sodium chloride, which is common salt, the main impurity. As the process goes on, the salt, which is less soluble at high temperatures, comes out of solution and sinks to the bottom of the pan. It's then scraped out from the bottom using this ladle, and I think you can see some in the baskets over there. So as the process goes on, the concentration of potassium nitrate, the all-important saltpeter, in the liquid goes up, and the level of sodium chloride, one of the main impurities, goes down. You're constantly purifying the saltpeter, making it better and better. The evaporating pan full of the saltpeter liquid has been boiling for most of the morning. They've removed the impurities, the salts, with the scoops as we've already seen, and now they've decided it's ready. What they do is they just let a little bit of the liquid on one finger. If it drips, it's not ready, but if it just stays where it is and crystallises, it's ready. What they then do is they then scoop it out at the back of the pan into a settling tank. Now, once the large evaporating tank has been emptied into the settling tank, it's left there for about 3 hours. Of course, a lot of the solids and the very big impurities sink to the bottom. It's then drawn off by a very ingenious pipe into a second, smaller tank. From there, it's brought by buckets into this building, and it's put into one of these wooden tanks here set into the floor to cool. Now, it stays in this tank for anything up to 8 days. Slightly shorter in the winter, longer in the summer. It needs the time to cool. They also hang this framework, this lattice work of bamboo across the top of the tank, and that helps the saltpeter to precipitate, to come out of solution. When it's all out of solution, they remove the water and then take the crystals and put them on this, the bamboo charlie. Here, the saltpeter is made into a big pile, and clean water is poured through it. This dissolves the impurities which run out through the base of the charlie and are washed away. What you then have here is the refined saltpeter. Once it's taken out, dried in the sun, ready to make gunpowder. Well, we've come to the end of the process now, and here is the final product, the saltpeter, ready to make gunpowder. Now, we've had a truly wonderful day here today, being shown just how gunpowder was made at least 100 years ago, and probably for the last 400 to 500 years. We've seen how the saltpeter was extracted from the soil, then very primitively refined, and then finally double refined to produce the saltpeter that can make gunpowder. Now from here, we're going to go east, down the Ganges, following the saltpeter in its thousands upon thousands of tons, down to the English and Danish colonies at Calcutta and Serampore. It was from there that saltpeter was exported to the West and helped to fuel the wars that enabled Europe to dominate the world and shape our world today. On our way east looking for the saltpeter, we've stopped here at the ancient Hindu holy city of Varanasi. We're now on the river Ganges, a great river that flows right across northern India. And it's this, of course, that provided the transport for the enormous trade and commerce across India, taking all the goods down to the ports like Calcutta, especially, of course, the saltpeter. We're now in Calcutta, and behind me is Fort William. Now, unfortunately, it's still occupied by the army, and we can't get in there to visit it. Now, the British defeated combined Indian forces at the Battle of Plassey in 1758 and gained control over the whole of this part of northeast India. They founded Calcutta in 1690 and by 1699 had built this formidable fortress to guard the approaches to the river. And it was really this town, Calcutta, that was the base for the British for so long, controlled the trade through northeast India, including the all-important saltpeter trade. I'm standing outside the university at Serampore, just to the north of Calcutta. Now, the university was founded by the Danish colony here in 1827. It was actually the fourth Danish university to be founded and the very first European university in India. Now, Serampore was set up as a colony by the Danes to try to control the saltpeter trade in West Bengal. It was here they took the saltpeter downriver and then exported it to Europe. However, the English had established themselves further down the river at Fort William, and they became very strong, and in 1769 they declared a monopoly on saltpeter and forbade anybody else to trade in it. As compensation, they allowed the Danish to have it at a special price, but unfortunately the Danish colony just didn't thrive, and in 1845 the colony was sold to the British for 1,125,000 riksdaler. Now, at the time, Galathea I came out from Denmark to oversee the transfer, and it's very strange to think over 160 years later we're here on a Danish expedition as Galathea III. We are now at the Indian Institute for Technology in Kanpur, at the very end of our expedition to India. With the guests here of Professor Balasubramaniam, who has done so much to help and open many doors for us here in India. We have spent the last few days here writing up our preliminary results and discussing them with him and his colleagues, geologists and chemists. It is too early yet to make any concrete conclusions, but we've accomplished what we came here to do and found much more than we could ever have expected. In the last 4 weeks, we have made many firm friends and contacts here in India. We have answered many of our initial questions, and we're excited at what we discover when the samples we've collected, over 40 of them, are analysed and we have the results. Of course, this will probably raise many more questions, but even now, we are getting a real sense of how saltpeter from India, made into gunpowder in the West, was a major force in shaping our world today.